Hello. So in this video, I'm going to review this book, What is History Now by Helen Carr and Suzannah Lipscomb. And I can really say that this book was incredibly enjoyable. I enjoyed it more than any book I've read for a long, long time. I really thought it was absolutely fantastic. So I strongly, strongly recommend it if you are a history student, if you are somebody who's thinking about studying history at university, if you're just generally interested in history. Um, and why history is important in today's world. I think it's a really, really great read, so I'd strongly, strongly recommend it. So before we get into this one, What is History Now, we have to talk about this one by E.H. Carr, What is History, which is a book which is based on a series of lectures that E.H. Carr did in 1961. And it's an absolute classic about history as a discipline and the role of history in society and historians, historiography, all of those things. So this is a classic. And if you're studying history at university or you're thinking about studying history at university, I still think this stands up. I think it's a really, really good read. Let's talk about this one really briefly. So E.H. Carr in this one, a couple of absolutely kind of classic lines. E.H. Carr says history is an unending dialogue between the present and the past, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Just a brilliant way of thinking about the past. So history's always changing. It's a dialogue between the present and the past. How we understand the past obviously changes depending on our perspective and the perspective we're coming from. So that's what I think E.H. Carr meant by that. The other thing he says, which I'm going to quote from this book, is history consists of a corpus of ascertained facts. The facts are available to the historian in documents, inscriptions, and so on, like fish on a fishmonger's slab. The historian collects them, takes them home, and cooks and serves them in whatever style appeals to him. So this idea that we've got to, before we study the history, we've got to look at the historian and understanding that every work of history is an interpretation. That the past is one thing, that, everything that happened is the past, but history is an interpretation of the past. And every history is an interpretation. So that's what E.H. Carr is basically arguing here. There's a lot more to it, but that's like in a nutshell. And so this book is kind of updating that, and it's bringing history really into the present. There was another book called What is History Now, which was edited by David Cannadine, which is really great. I really enjoyed this, and I recommend reading that. One thing I would say about this is I think this is kind of its time. This one was published in 2002, so it's about 20 years old now, whereas this one is published very, very recently, so much more up to date. So we've got What is History and What is History Now. There are other books on history as a discipline, like The Uses and Abuses of History by Margaret MacMillan, which I strongly recommend as well. I think that if you're interested in history as a discipline and how history can be kind of distorted and used by politicians particularly, and those in power, I think that's a good read. Another one that I recommend and that I enjoyed is Why History Matters by John Tosh. I thought that was a really good read too. So I'll put links to all these books in the description. But let's get back to this one. What is History Now? So it contains a series of essays, and in total there are 19 essays, and they cover lots and lots of different aspects of history. They're by different writers, different historians. So global history, history in the movies, the history of empire, diversity, the history of the lost lives of women, history of religion, family history, museums, how literature shapes history. So a wide range of things from a wide range of writers. The other great thing about it is that after each essay is a list of like further reading, wider reading that you can do. So if you are, for example, particularly interested in global history, and you've read the first, I think the first chapters by Peter Frankopan, who did the Silk Roads, he's put a list of selected further reading, so you can look at that and think, okay, I'm really interested in that, where can I go next? And I think that's just a brilliant thing that they've done in this book. So it really could lead you to, you know, different avenues of exploring different areas of history. So I'm just going to pull out a few key quotes because I really, really enjoyed this. It really brought history to life and just really emphasized how important history is in today's world. So I'm just going to read a few quotes from a few of the articles, the essays in here, because I think it really kind of excited me, and I hope that it's interesting for people to hear. So in Peter Frankopan's essay on why global history matters, he writes, history should be about broadening horizons, widening perspectives, giving greater context to help us understand others and to better understand ourselves. If we fail to do that, history becomes something closer to fairy tales that are read to children, stories that are above all both familiar and exciting. So this idea that history should be about broadening horizons. It's not something that should be familiar and kind of comfortable. We should be looking out and trying to learn more from history, which I think is great. In Alex von Tunzelmann's essay on why history deserves to be at the movies, there's a great quote that I've pulled out here. It says, there is a better way to address how we tell fact from fiction, and that is to encourage and teach critical thinking at all levels. Here is where the study of history can come in. If history is taught as long lists of kings and dates to be swallowed and regurgitated, then students might win a pub quiz one day. If history is taught instead as a process of questioning and research, of sifting through information, making informed judgments about reliable or unreliable sources, of contextualizing, synthesizing, and understanding, then that equips students with an extraordinary, powerful range of tools to navigate the modern world. I think that's absolutely brilliant. Just that history's much, much more than just facts and dates and names, that it's about the process and being critical and thinking critically, and giving people skills to navigate the world. You know, I think that's really, really important. In Suzannah Lipscomb's essay on how we can recover the lost lives of women historically not talked about a great deal in history traditionally, and often the sources were written by men. So in this essay, she's kind of engaging with how can we uncover those lives of women, the kind of forgotten women. And I think this is a really interesting point just about research. And it says historians have demonstrated that the archive is a site of power. The sources in it may give the illusion of transparency, objectivity, and completeness, but the stories they tell about the past are partial and censored. And this links back to E.H. Carr in What is History, where he talks about how archives are constructed too. You know, who chooses what goes in an archive. And he talks about Gustav Streseman's archives, and the process that they were put together, Streseman's papers, and how that was a construct. So Suzannah Lipscomb is talking along those lines. In an essay on why history matters, Emily Brand says, an optimist might even hope that by inquiring into and acknowledging its own diversity, an informed society would be more inclined towards toleration and acceptance. So this idea that history could potentially lead to a more accepting and tolerant society, because by understanding that the past was diverse, and there's a multitude of stories, that we can actually learn more about the present and be more empathetic. And then the last quote that I'm going to take out here, and this is from an essay called Why History Should Always Be Rewritten by Charlotte Lydia Riley. And it's really talking a lot about statues and this idea of people taking down statues is erasing history. It says, making history should be a collaborative, creative act. Pulling down a statue is not erasing history. It's an act of historiography, the process by which historians critically evaluate ideas about the past. Pulling down a statue is the act of challenging a previous generation's interpretation of the past. So much in this to really get you thinking about history and the importance of history as a discipline, and what history means why history matters, why history is so important in today's world. So, if you've read it, I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say. If you've read any of the others that I mentioned, similarly, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. I hope that was useful. Thanks for listening.